Okay, I think we can start. Hello, everybody. Welcome to the next edition of ZgPHP Meetups. Hi, people on the live stream. Welcome. I'm going to be short, just short agenda for today. We have a short group announcements. We have Diana is going to talk about how she needs developers. She has some interesting jobs, so stay tuned. After that, we will have a Bonfight introduction. And after that, we'll have an amazing talk by Vedran. He's going to talk about 10 REST commandments. And after that, we'll have a round of lightning talks. So if someone is interested, actually, just ping me around. You have 5 minutes. You can talk about whatever you want. You can talk about Ukraine and Russia, if that suits you. And finally, drinks and pizzas. And that's all for today. So please maintain a social distance and wear masks. Don't laugh. Okay, so the next meetup is going to be at 17th of March at Undabot. So join us there. And Diana, please join us.
So the stage is mine. Thank you. I will keep it short. So I'm Diana. I come from Ambacia. Ambacia is a recruitment agency specialized in IT. So basically, we work with a lot of IT companies, and currently we have a great PHP position open. You would work with Symfony framework, but Symfony is not a requirement. If you have experience with any other framework similar to Symfony, feel free to hit me up. I will leave my business cards somewhere here so you can discreetly take them and call me, send me an email, whatever you like. So that's it. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Okay, and now our host, please give them a big applause.
Okay, hi everyone. Thank you for coming. I see there's a lot of you. We didn't expect so many people. As my shirt says, I'm from Bonfight. We build and scale digital products that help people achieve continuous and repeatable success. Let me see I didn't expect this to be in English, so I didn't prepare. So this means we develop digital products. Yeah.
We don't understand this.
Mi razvijamo digitalne proizvode. Okay. So we have backend, frontend, iOS, Android, Flutter, and QA teams. And in backend, we have 2 tracks. One is PHP with Symfony as our tool of choice. And on the other hand, it's Node.js with Nest.js framework. And we do also these other things, React.js, iOS, Android, Flutter, QA. So we employ many positions, or we have many open positions for these departments. So these are our open position at this moment. We are specifically looking for engineering leads for specific projects. So we're looking for a match with the project. So you can check this on our bornfight.com/careers. And these are some other open positions. But as every company in 2022 is hiring, so are we. You can, if you're interested, just contact us. Yeah, that's it. Thank you.
Okay, Vedran, the stage is yours. Please give the Vedran big applause.
Hi, everyone. Okay, I don't need that one.
So hi everyone, thank you Mario for inviting me. My name is Vedran and I'll be doing the talk about APIs today. I didn't want to do a talk about APIs, but Mario said he liked the article. Maybe next time we'll do about scaling with APIs and PHP and some of the things that we do. But for now, the talk is about the 10 REST commandments. I think it still applies because basically you all are building, at the end of the day, APIs, and the talk is more about how to build an API as a backend developer and still stay friends with the rest of your team. And please note that I bolded REST because we are talking about REST API, so kudos to me. In any case, let's move on. So who am I? Shortly. This is a picture of me. I roughly look the same, just a different shirt. My name is Vedran. I've been a full stack developer for the past 15 years. I actually started with PHP and I still do PHP on a daily basis. I just moved more to Laravel. I think it's a beautiful framework. I think it allows us to do many things. But before this, I used to run a small, I would say, I hate this word, but it's a boutique development company where we kind of worked a lot on a few smaller projects throughout the year, but we did it all, with PHP and Laravel. And my interests are APIs, Laravel, and performance. And at the moment, I run a startup called Treble, and we like to say that we're a one-stop shop for APIs. Or just a bit of marketing lingo. We like to, Treble makes it super easy to understand what's going on with your APIs and the apps that use them. I'm not going to say we're hiring, but we are. So if you are Laravel or PHP developers and love working on big scale projects, just reach out to me. But I know you all guys are very comfortable in your current positions. So when we think about a modern day API, it's important to understand who might use the API that you're building, right? So unlike before where you guys used to build an API and it would be used by probably like 3 people and 2 of them were your friends, nowadays you've got more and more people with different roles. So you've got testers and QA teams, other backend developers, native or non-native mobile developers, front-end developers, product and project managers. All of these guys are using an API in one way, shape, or form. Either they're directly interacting with it, or they want data from it, or they're trying to analyze it, or they're trying to understand it, or they're trying to test it. So essentially, when you think about it, many of these roles probably don't have a lot of experience working with APIs. But you're still building for all of these guys. So your API is going to be used and consumed and analyzed by all of these APIs. So that means the API that we're building needs to, kind of be in line with what they know. And that's why we come to the 10 REST commandments. The first one would be practical. And we're going to talk about the basics of how to properly set up your API. The next one is going to be called be methodical. And we're going to explore some of the HTTP request method. Then we have be semantical, where we take a look at some of the best practices about naming endpoints and parameters and structuring your API. They'll make sense to everybody, not just you as a developer. Finally, we're going to talk about securing your API using some of the most common and most simplest way of actually securing it. Staying organized is going to be a next one. Being consistent, which I think is probably the most important thing which you could do on a REST API. Besides being organized. Finally, the last 3 are going to be about handling errors, predicting errors, understanding how they can happen and how you react to them. Then being smart, and this is something that I would say is newer to APIs, where nowadays APIs handle more and more complexity. So you guys are building a lot more complicated APIs that consume multiple different APIs in the background, and you guys are the ones that are handling all that complexity. So you guys got to be smart about how you do that. Finally, my favorite topic would probably be lean, even though I'm not as lean, but I do like to keep my APIs as lean as possible and as fast as possible. The last one, and this is just mainly philosophical, is going to be about being considerate, and most of all, being considerate to the roles that I've just shown you before. Because like I said, at the end of the day, we are building for everybody that we saw on the previous slide. And as everybody here probably knows, these are just suggestions. These are suggestions based on my experience. REST is not a standard. I cannot make you do these things. It is a loosely, very, very loosely defined standard schema, which is a part of the problem. So to get into it, let's talk about the first one. It's a very simple one, but a very effective one. But yet a lot of developers actually forget to do this, and that is, ta-da, imagine just responding with application JSON would actually make your life easier. So not responding with application XML, not responding with text XML, text plain, or any of the other data types that you might be inclined to do, or more importantly, your PHP, in this case, language, might do by default. So if you're going to use JSON, and I hope you are, if by any chance you are planning on using XML or SOAP, I do feel sorry for you. Maybe this talk isn't for you. If there are members here, we can all grouply try to bring you on board to REST JSON-based APIs. But why are we using JSON? It's easier to use, it's easier to write, it's easier to read. Literally anybody can understand JSON, especially if you do a very good job. It's also faster, much faster and easier to consume, uses less memory than XML and everything else. The best thing about it is it doesn't require a single dependency, right? So PHP has this built in. Laravel does a very nice job. Symfony also supports this very well. So believe it or not, just send that header back. You can set some defaults when you're doing it, and your job will be much easier. Next, after an easy one, we're gonna talk about maybe a controversial one, if you will, and that's called be methodical. So as you guys know, we've got a couple of HTTP methods, and I would say God has sent us these methods and has universally translated these methods from China to Germany to United States. Everybody understands what these methods are, so we should use them. We shouldn't respond with get, we shouldn't post data with get, we shouldn't delete data with get and stuff like that. So do as many things as you can with each of these. They all have a meaning. Get is mostly for reading data. I made an article. It just makes sense when you say it, get articles. It means you are actually getting a bunch of articles back from the server. Post is about storing data, and when you're posting something, you're expecting to store something. Put is about updating data. Patch is about updating data also, but unlike put, with patch, you're expected to only patch the things that you need, unlike put, where you send a bunch of things and it just updates everything at once. And finally, delete is, of course, about deleting data. And there's this notion of some of these methods are called safe, and there's a hugely complicated word called idempotent. I don't know if you've probably heard of it, but essentially that means that if you make a request to the same endpoint and it doesn't change anything, it means it's idempotent, right? So there are safe and idempotent methods. I listed which of these methods are safe and destructive or non-destructive. Next up, after that, it's all about being semantical. So this is where a lot of controversy comes from. This is where a lot of confusion comes from, right? Because REST isn't actually a standard. Nobody can make you follow these rules. If you do the thing in red, which clearly states no, bad, you'll still get away with it. You can do that, but you shouldn't be doing that. So if you're designing an API, you should, like I said, first use all the HTTP methods that you have on your disposal, because again, a guy sitting in China understands what you're trying to do. A guy sitting in Croatia also understands what you're trying to do with these. And when you just think about it, as far as naming conventions go, you should always use nouns instead of verbs. Why? Because all of the HTTP methods are actually verbs. So get is a word, post is a verb. So if you say get users, it makes sense. But if you say get users, it doesn't make any sense because you're using a double word. Another thing that you should definitely consider using is plur instead of singular. Why plur? Because you can reuse it in all cases. So if you say Get users, you can get users, post users, you can post users. If you were using get user or post user, it would mean that you are trying to get a single user or trying to do something to a single user. So if you start off with plurals, it's just much easier for you later on. Next up, we've got single word instead of multi-word. So instead of using users update or list all users or dashes or whatever, if you need to do it, use a backslash to separate these things, because at the end of the day, you are building APIs and you can go as many depths as you want. An example of that is users /ID /comments. That is better than saying get user comments. So if you go and structure your API at the beginning, you shouldn't have any problems. And finally, this, I really cannot make you use this, but you should consider using snake case. Why? PayPal uses it, Stripe uses it, Facebook uses it. So I know there's a lot of debate between snake case, camel case, all other cases. I think this is the cleanest to read. I actually enjoy reading these. Please don't hate me if you don't use snake case. But this is just my, my honest opinion. Next up, we've got another topic called be secure. So essentially, one of the first things that you should definitely do is use HTTPS. So if you're not using HTTPS in 2022, I do feel sorry for you. It is really simple. It is, it doesn't even cost money anymore. Usually, 5 years ago, you'd pay like $500 for an SSL certificate. Nowadays, you can get any API gateway comes with an HTTPS certificate. Any possible server that you might deploy to has an SSH certificate. And when you think about it, it's just something that you should do. Another thing that you should definitely do is use any type of authorization. Any is better than none. Even if you're using a username and password, it doesn't matter. You're still using something. Why? Think of it this way. You have a house. You have an apartment. You have a key to that house. If somebody wants to enter your house, you give him a key or you make him a key. So I suggest you treat the API the same way. You issue a key to somebody, you know who you gave the key, you know who that person is, you know only that person can consume that API, you know that person is a safe person. If you want to take out his privileges, you just take out the key. Trust me, I've been at situations where people haven't been using authorization and have paid a tremendous amount of money to companies like Cloudflare, AWS. I'm talking like 5-digit numbers just to get them past security and secure their API accounts. Another thing, let me just grab a sip of this magical drink. Another important thing in my mind is you should consider using UIDs over IDs, especially in your APIs. I'm not saying you should kick out IDs from your databases. I'm just saying that when you're exposing things over the API, just use UIDs. Again, it's one of those security things. These are very hard, UIDs are very hard to guess. IDs are very easy to guess, of course. And you can nowadays even use third-party plugins to convert an ID to UID or just add one more field to your database and you'll be much, much more safer. When we're talking about security, one of the hottest topics probably nowadays is just going serverless. What that means is you don't have a traditional server. All of the complexity of security and scaling and everything is handled by people who make a living out of securing things, making things run. So AWS Lambda for PHP guys, Bref, Laravel, Vapor, and stuff like that will make your life much, much more easier on that front. Finally, one of the probably overlooked things that maybe some of you don't know is you should definitely clean up your headers. So headers are actually very interesting because you could pull out so much data. At Treble, we pull out a bunch of data. We, for example, extract the location of the user from headers. We even pull out the details of what iOS version you have installed on your phone from headers, or what Android version you have installed directly from headers. That's how powerful headers are. And what's funny, in Apache, which is what most of us are using if we're not running serverless, by default, you have two configuration options called server signature and server tokens. Now, these two actually expose the version of the PHP you're running on and the version of the Apache you're running on. It's literally an on and off configuration in the Apache config file. And if you turn them off, nobody will know what you're using. If you leave them on, then you're just making it easier for somebody to hack you by exploiting another exploit in the Apache version. And finally, update regularly. I know personally that's sometimes impossible. The other day, Laravel 9 came out. We didn't yet update. We plan to, but that takes time. But of course, try to do that on a regular basis. At least try to patch Apache and try to rotate the keys that you have for logging in to whatever you have regularly. Next one is about being organized, and I kind of simplified this one. Of course, there is code level organization, which I'll leave up to you, and that is totally, a longer conversations. But however you organize your code around APIs is important, of course. But you should also, one thing that I see like 9 out of 10 APIs don't use is versioning. And again, I get the idea. We haven't been using it since day one. It's very complicated. It's very, not just for you as a developer, but also for everybody interacting with it. And you're thinking, okay, if we ever make an update, it's going to be a jump from V1, V2, then we're probably going to spin up another server. It's going to be another endpoint. Trust me, start versioning as soon as possible. If you have an iOS or an Android app, start versioning as soon as possible. You will need to deploy things. You will mess around with your database. If you have versioning, making updates or locking somebody out or in or adjusting the response for one of these things is very easy, because keep in mind, you build an API and you can do a tremendous job, but if the iOS or Android developer wants a strict type of integer and you return a string, it might crash the app. You really depend on the other person doing a good job in terms of integrating. The next one is all about being consistent, and that I'm just going to give you 2 code examples here of what I think matters. And there's that saying that consistency is what transforms average into excellence, and I think that also applies on APIs. So the first and foremost thing that you should do is be consistent with your models or resources or whatever you want to call them. So if you're returning something, just keep it the same across every single response you have. That means, on a practical example, on the left side, we're getting details for one single article. In that case, we have a bunch of comments right here which are loaded. And sometimes because of eager loading or because you don't want to overload your database, on the articles API input, you just might skip that and not return that. If you are loading an array here, then simply load the array there and just make it empty. You don't have to populate it. You don't have to query the database, but still return that array so that the other person who's getting the data can count on that array being there, because it is a fundamental part of the API structure. Next one is about being graceful, and things fail. That's a given. That's just the name of the game. It's about how you handle things. And again, just like with HTTP methods, somebody has done a really good job at thinking, what are some of the most common ways that we can respond to, and you have at your arsenal. And I see designers made a mistake, 5 different HTTP response codes, or at least 5 categories, right? So you've got informational response codes that start with 1, then XXX. Then you've got success response code. The most famous one is 200 or 2XX. Redirection response code starting with 3, and client error response code starting with 4, and server error response code starting with 5. So the name of the game here is, if you are trying to indicate to somebody that they haven't validated, then use a client error response code, because they've done a bad job, not you. If you messed up and you want to tell somebody, hey, I messed up, if you send a 500, they will understand it. every client for iOS, for Android, for everything has this error handling built in. You don't have to do anything. You just have to make sure that you're returning this code. I know Laravel has this. It's very easy. Symfony has this. For PHP, okay, you got to do some messing around, but you can easily do that. And again, just like with the HTTP methods, a guy in Bangladesh, a guy in Africa, and this guy right here, they all understand what's going on with these codes, and you've got a plethora of them. You can use them for every specific reason, everything from validation errors to them being an idiot and not authorizing, which is probably the most common use case that we see. Also, one of the overlooked parts of you as a backend developer, if you will, or a PHP developer, would be trying to predict where others will fail and provide them with as much details as possible. Why as much details? You will just make yourself more free, and you will make your job easier. If you tell your iOS developer, this is the reason why your API requests fail, they're not going to ask you. So unless you want to be stuck providing support, integration support, on endless developer meetings, explaining to other developers what happened, you should just simply tell them exactly what goes on, and you should try to do it in a way that scales. So for example, by that I mean you should try to come up with a unique and continuous, consistent error model that scales. That means if you have one error, you can still handle it from the same model. If you have 50 errors, you still want to be able to handle that with the same response codes. The last one is about being smart, and I kind of touched upon it at the beginning, but essentially what we see at Treble and what I've personally seen for the past 5 years, the complexity and the things that you guys are handling on the API side is just getting vastly more complicated. So you're not only storing things to a database, you're calling other APIs, you're depending on their responses, you're making transactions, you're connecting to other databases, you're doing a bunch of things that usually you weren't doing. And even in modern data apps, you might be sending an entire JSON that literally controls every part of the app, everything from the design, whether or not to show this button, what the button text is going to be, and so on and so forth. So being smart is about understanding that the API is the brain of the whole operation when you're building an app, a product, or whatever. And that means that your immediate goal in all cases should be to protect your most valuable asset, which is the database. It's your role to kind of protect the database from being hit too hard, from getting bad data in, from getting bad data out, and everything else. That is your primary role, and that is sometimes hard because you will probably get bad data from everywhere, including users, including third-party APIs. But your goal should be to try to sanitize and normalize that data so that at the end of the day, when you're querying your data, you have what you need and not what they gave you. Any good API will actually handle all the complexities and all the processes on its own and won't depend on clients for help. So for example, let's say you're subscribing a user, and let's say you're registering a user, and alongside that you want to send them an SMS message, you want to subscribe them to MailChimp. You shouldn't make that 3 API calls. You shouldn't leave that logic to the client or the app or whoever is handling the integration. You should do that all in one single API call. Why? It's very simple. If your boss comes up tomorrow and says, I don't want to use MailChimp, I don't want to use this, I don't want to use that, I want to use this, you'll be able to fix it. You don't have to go back to the iOS app or the Android app, issue an update, and go through that complexity together. One of the overlooked things is making sure that your API is optimized for cross-platform solutions. So nowadays, you're probably building APIs for Apple Watches, for your mobile phones, for TVs, and you're probably dealing with images, you're probably dealing with trimming texts. So all of those things should have a dynamic component. What I mean by that is you should serve images that are optimized to the platform that you're doing. So for example, You shouldn't send a 5,000 times 5,000 image to an iPhone because that's not something an iPhone can handle. If you have a TV app and you want to send the TV 5,000 times 5,000, yes, then do that. But you should also allow that. You should essentially allow the client to be able to tell you, I need an image that is 1,200 pixels and return all the images in that size for that API call. That is the way that you handle that, and that is the way you do it. Similarly, one of the most common use cases is trimming text. So on an iPhone, you might have 1 row of text or 2 rows of text. On an iPad, you might have 5. On a MacBook, you might have 10. You should allow your developer to say, I need X amount of characters, I need X amount of rows, and you should trim that for them. They shouldn't be the ones making those decisions. Why? A new iPhone can come out tomorrow. All of a sudden, it has a bigger screen. It can fit 1 more line of code. You have to issue a code update like this. You don't. Again, we follow this line. The less you depend on the client to do things, the better. Why? Your clients, mainly mobile developers, Android developers, iOS developers, front-end developers, these guys have no idea about databases. These guys have no idea about scaling. These guys have no idea about optimizations. These guys have no idea about anything. I mean, not about anything. Well, they're good at their job, but not at scaling things like you are. So your primary role is essentially trying to make their job as simple as possible and handling all the complexity. The next one is about being lean, and in my opinion, that's just like one of my favorite topics. Is whenever somebody says an API is slow, 9 out of 10, literally 9 out of 10, what we see, it starts on a database level. So you are, can I curse here? So you are fucking up on a database level if your API is slow. Usually, 9 out of 10. There are situations where, yes, your server will be slow. Like, for example, if you're deploying on a Lambda server and you have to warm up a Lambda, et cetera, et cetera. But in most cases, if somebody tells you your API is slow, you need to do a better job on your database. You need to add indexes. You need to add caching. A strong topic for an easy solutions for all your problems in terms of APIs, just add caching. Just cache things. I know Tia is looking at me. She's our iOS developer. She's probably going to be pissed, but just add caching. It'll save you. It'll save your database. Use a time frame that works to your advantage. Even if you cache things for 1 minute on 1 million requests, that is a lot, right? Because you've saved your database 2 million requests if you cached it for a minute. We have at Treble, we handle 15 million requests per month on our API. If we cache things for 5 minutes, that's like $100 on our AVS bill. So just cache things. Try to make your life easier by using compression methods. There are many of them. The most popular one is gzip. It comes installed by default on Apache. You can use this. I think all you need to do is set a header. There are many more interesting compressions like Brotli and some of the things that Google is doing. One of the probably most overlooked things that I see people kind of use less and less, or at least overlook, is the use of HTTP2. So HTTP2 is by all fronts like 100 times faster than HTTP1 in handling everything from multiple requests to the load times to optimizing network performance. Just use HTTP2 if you can. If you're using HTTP3, then you have my salutes. There is HTTP3. If you take a look at some of the logs that you guys might have, or your analytics, you'll see that Google is already using HTTP3, Cloudflare is already using HTTP3, and again, it is better than HTTP2. And of course, when you're talking about being lean, you can easily plug and play a bunch of solutions. Like if you use any API gateway, they will do a lot of these things for you automatically. And finally, the last one before we end the talk is about being considerate. So we come back to the beginning of this talk and who will be using your API. Who are you building? Of course, in your company, they're going to tell you you're building for a guy named Joe in Kentucky, but that's actually not true. He's not gonna even know you exist. Neither your API exists, you're essentially developing for other people. So essentially, developing APIs for backend developers is a pretty lonely job, and especially at the beginning. But remember, there is a slew of people waiting on you and depending on you to do a good job. If you don't deliver good documentation, somebody that comes after you will not be able to do their job efficiently. If your API is slow, somebody down the line, a project manager, a product manager, a QA person is going to tell, okay, this API or this app is slow. You're going to be called into a meeting with your app developer, with your API developer, whoever it is you are, and you're going to have to explain why you did a bad job. So essentially, try to understand that there are more players involved here and that you're building something for a multitude of different roles and different people. So that's all for the talk. Like I said, it's not very technical. I did want to keep it technical. If you have any questions about APIs or anything or what we do at Treble, I'll be more than happy to answer.
So do we have any questions?
Yeah, one here.
Just a sec.
Guys,
we need microphone.
I mean, I can speak loud, so.
Yeah, but the people on the
I can already hear you.
Okay. Does this, can you guys hear me?
Yeah, this
Yep,
is
yep.
for the live stream. For the guys in the live stream.
Okay. You said about versioning your API.
Yeah.
How, and a very practical example, how would you do in Laravel? Would you spin, you said a new server, would you spin new routes? How would you organize your files?
I would use, yeah, there are many things. You could use query parameters, you could use headers, or you could use URL-based versioning. That is what I would use. That is what we use on Treble. That is what we've used before. It just makes your life easier. Why? Because let's say you have a tool like Treble or other logging tools, and you're trying to figure out what API endpoint you're hitting, you can easily guess that from the URL. If you're using headers, that is deeply tucked away into the headers, which not a lot of tools catch except Treble. And if you use query parameters, that's just messy, especially in combination with post and put and patch. We actually finished building an API boilerplate for Laravel. We're going to put that on GitHub probably next week. I had a couple of engineers from Shopify, Spotify, all building this with me. So it includes a bunch of best practices like the ones that I just described. So you'll be able to take a look then.
Yeah, but I was asking more in the sense of not from the client side of things, but from the developer side.
Okay, specifically, like how do I handle controllers or something?
Exactly. How would you like organize, for example?
So we at Treble, or at least what we try to do, is we have single responsibility controllers. So for example, for storing an article, we would have a controller called article store, right? And that controller would be involved only in storing that article. And inside of that, we would have a version check, right? So we wrote a bunch of Composer did this well. So we use the same practice as Composer does to detect versions. So you could do things like abort unless, right? So we say abort unless version 1.1, and we specify an error. Or you can specify a different response, because what we've had situations where we might issue an update, right, to the JSON structure that is being sent to Treble, and it has one important key that we didn't have in version 1.1. So we would essentially try to detect it on a controller level and give a different response and stop it immediately in some cases.
Thank you.
Not a problem.
Okay, so regarding the versioning thing again,
Yeah.
how do you handle deprecating old versions? So let's say you have 1, 2, and 3 versions, and then version 1 is deprecated, no longer used, and let's say version 2 is in sunset mode, so it will be deprecated soon, but not yet. So
Yeah.
how do you do that?
So I think that's more of a business question if you think about it, isn't it? Because if your manager says, you know, we got to support version 1 of the API or the app, you just got to do it. But essentially, we try to I think it starts a bit different. So you never want to, let's say, I don't know, if we're talking about in the span of 6 months, we'll just stop supporting version 1. But again, in our controllers, we have the ability to check for a specific version and respond to that version. So we might even have a master controller to store an article. And in that controller, we might have specific either traits or something like that that would handle a specific version of the request. Even sometimes there are situations where they're missing MySQL data, we would try to normalize it or null it and so on and so forth. So essentially for us, it's mostly about predicting when we will be making drastic changes to our API, making sure we never support like 5 versions backwards. We maybe support 2 versions backwards. So version 2, version 1, or something like that, right? But that's it. Given that we use that single responsibility idea, we can easily do that.
A quick additional one. Once you drop version 1, what happens to the code? Do you completely remove it or just leave it?
We usually have folders. So our naming structure would be like
okay.
We would have a folder. I don't know. Let's say we don't do it for controllers. We do it for resources. In Laravel, I don't know how many Laravel developers we have here, but we leave controllers always in the controllers folder. But as far as resources goes, which is the model that is returned to the app, we version those. So we've got version 1, version 1.1, and then depending on the controller logic, we essentially reuse those. So yeah.
Okay, thanks. Anyone else?
Do we have more questions?
Come on, man. I want to sit down.
It's not even like it's not even a question. It's just like
last time I ate was 2 p.m. So go ahead.
Okay, I'll make 3 more then for you. It's not a question. It's more like an adding to what you said about UUIDs instead of using IDs, UUIDs. Besides of what you said, also there's the fact that when you use IDs, there's the problem of security/business where if I try to guess, or if I take a metric of the ID that you're using right now, and an hour later I make the same request, I can guess how many users you are having signing up on your API per minute or per hour. So it's just a fun fact.
We started using, actually fun fact from me now, we started using UUIDs. We had this client from Norway. He has this app, doesn't matter. He uses a lot of Filipino workers to essentially, automate some of the processes that he doesn't want to do. And we were using IDs, right? And we had a bunch of logic in our app that, it would say something like, in order to approve an order, you have to hit a certain endpoint with an ID. And there were certain rules, right, that we would tell them. You can't approve an order in this way or that way. These guys, to their credit, like they figured out that they could change IDs on their own and that they could skip past what we were building and just do things the way they wanted to. And since then, we're using UUIDs on top of course, checking whether or not somebody can actually do something. But yes, you're absolutely right. You can definitely find a lot of information, and you wouldn't believe how many people are actually still using IDs.
By the way, you like to talk. The next meetup, we don't have a speaker, so. Are you in?
I'll see.
Is that yes?
Maybe.
Okay, so.
Cool. Thank you, guys.
Okay, so one last thing. Do we have anyone who is interested to stage a lightning talk? Going once, going second. Sold. I declare this meetup over. Thank you very much.